All right, man, we're live.
All righty.
We are live, and we are today here for, what is this, our third one?
Yep.
Our third podcast on the page. And today we're talking about recovery. And so far we've talked about nutrition, and then the other one we talked about was just basic strength and conditioning principles, right? And when me and you kind of got together about what we want to talk about next, we kind of went with recovery just based off the fact of that seemed to be what a lot of people were talking about, right? We got a lot of people on this page that, you know, it's really a big mix. We got people that are new to lifting. We got a lot of people that work out, CrossFit owners, CrossFit trainers, or they also do jujitsu, or, you know, they're doing multiple disciplines at the same time. And, you know, we got a lot of questions from people like, hey, I want to get in shape and I want to improve my cardio, but I also want to build muscle and I also want to get better at jujitsu, right? And you know, recovery is a big component. Recovery is a big component to that, right? And we kind of took 4 or 5 questions from the page and kind of talked about some of the ones that will be the simplest, easiest way to explain to them what is recovery, what are recovery techniques you can use. We know supplements, nutrition are a big part of that. People kind of pop in and they'll ask questions as we go, but you know, get into, and I'll pull up the sheet, get into some of the stuff we were talking about. And a lot of these are very simple, basic questions. And I guess to start off, recovery is so important because what I always talk to people about is just nervous system integrity, tissue integrity, right? You get a lot of people, like for instance, this week, I actually took an extra day. I usually do lower body on a Saturday, and I just didn't feel good. Felt a little bit lethargic. Took an extra day of recovery. Did lower body on Sunday, and then did my Monday, my typical day 2 workout. Just that extra day of recovery, it was amazing how much stronger and better I felt Sunday and Monday. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of people say in recovery, oh, you have to listen to your body. I think that's a tricky place, right? 100%. Because my body tells me to eat pizza and don't go train. Right? My body tells me to sit on Facebook until 1 a.m. and don't go to bed. Right? My body tells me I don't have to do that 5th set. Right? So I don't know if it's all about listening to your body as much as being able to manage your recovery with nutrition and the volume that you train. But there are things that you have to do outside of the gym. The biggest first question we can answer is, you know, can you explain exactly what recovery is and what's happening in your body when you actually do trying to recover? Now, from my understanding, right, you have recovery and then you have regeneration, right? Do you put those as 2 different things? And maybe you can answer in answering that question of what is recovery, maybe explain the difference between regeneration and recovery at the same time.
Yeah. So I think initially with recovery, you have to look at what is the overall principle that we're trying to define in terms of there's one school of thought showing you have fitness and fatigue, and there's kind of a trade-off here. And so anytime a person goes through a training session, there is this reduction in fitness and an increase in fatigue. Now, the difference between the 2 of those is typically referred to as preparedness, which is how much fitness a person can demonstrate at any point in time. Mm-hmm. So in terms of recovery, that's actually allowing for that fatigue to dissipate and that fitness to then be able to be exhibited. So with recovery and regeneration, typically I think of recovery as more of a short-term or acute sense, and then regeneration as the long-term chronic cellular adaptations.
Sure. Yep.
And I think with fatigue, you also have to consider there is central fatigue, but then also peripheral fatigue. So we have to look at recovery within the actual set itself, so rep to rep or set to set, and then recovery within the workout itself, so exercise to exercise. how long are we spending in between each exercise, and then session to session, which is where more of these recommendations are going to come in.
Yeah.
In terms of what you can do.
Okay, so to break that down simple, we have recovery. If you do a set and you wait 1 minute, it's a lot different than doing a set and taking 5 minutes.
Definitely.
Right? And then when you're done with an exercise, how much time are you doing between exercises? So we're dealing with, I like looking at it that way, because how many people do you see not maximize time in the gym because they take so long between sets?
Sure.
Or they're not strong in the gym because they're taking too little of rest. So we got that, and then we got that recovery, which is in between workouts recovery. I would say a lot of people, where do you feel like people struggle the most? The recovery inside the workout or recovery between workouts?
I think if you look at a specific subset of the gym population, I think you'll probably find more females in the strength training side of things kind of pushing the intra-workout recovery in terms of a negative sense. So they're kind of not allowing themselves enough rest in between sets, or they're using more of a circuit training fashion, which can be fine depending upon the goal. But I think then on the male side of the equation, you typically then will get other individuals who will rest, 5, 8, 10 minutes per set, and think more of that powerlifting side of things. And that's where the session can be extended beyond what is beneficial. So I think it depends on really the subset of population that we're talking about. But I think in general, people are always going to struggle session to session just because of the mindset and the methodology that's pushed in terms of more is always better. And so not really understanding how the physiology works from a recovery and regeneration standpoint, that person will then go in and continue to train again and again and again and not really see why they're plateauing or how to then fix that to change that plateau.
So what is happening? Let's discuss, just for this topic, let's discuss like what's happening in the body between a workout on Monday and then your workout on Tuesday.
Okay.
Right? When you say recovery, what is the body going through from the damage? Because it is damage, right? Mm-hmm. Training is the damage. That's you actually have a decrease in fitness, right? Yep. You damage the body on a Monday. What has to happen inside the body for it to be ready to train on that next day, Tuesday, or even Wednesday?
Yeah. So
talk
from
to me about that.
A neural perspective, we have this idea of it's called the central fatigue hypothesis, and it's the idea that your inability to exhibit force output is a centrally driven factor in that the brain is trying to protect itself, and so as a mechanism of self-preservation, it reduces force output. So that's kind of one of the players in fatigue. If a person feels like their strength is dropping off, then that can be a player, along with at the actual musculoskeletal level within the individual sarcomeres within the muscle, you'll actually generate micro tears that need to be healed and repaired in order for that muscle to increase in the total cross-sectional area. And then at a cellular level, you're going to see other things like the restoration of heart rate and blood pressure and ventilation, and that's kind of referred to as EPOC, which is idea of you do more high intensity intervals versus lower intensity. You get this greater increase in your resting energy expenditure after training. But really what's happening is your body is using that excess energy to bring metabolism back down to a point where you're no longer recovering. So metabolism speeds up in order to promote regeneration, and then it slows back down once that has fully occurred. So from like a hormonal perspective, that's really where you're starting at a foundational point.
You hear a lot of in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the MMA training environment, you hear the really good, smart coach. Now, granted, that industry is full of a lot of crap when it comes to training, right? Because that culture is very much a balls to the wall culture, right? They believe unless you train near death, you're not getting a positive outcome, right? Which is totally false, right? Like they feel you have to train your body to a death to enable to handle an MMA fight or a jiu-jitsu fight. And that's totally false. That's not how training works. But the really smart guys, you hear them talking about EPOC all the time, because really in that environment, how you handle energy and being able to recover is the idea, right? Being able to just efficiently manage energy. So when you're looking at muscle building, you actually damage your body in lifting. The nutrients and the nutrition and the rest and the recovery techniques you do are actually made to help literally heal the little micro tears in the muscle and to help recover your nervous system to prepare it. So if you are under recovered, that's why you hear people say you can't, and I don't know how accurate this is. It's kind of in general. You hear people say you can never overtrain, you can only undereat. And I think there's a ceiling there, right? That is true to a certain point, right? Then you're eventually just going to you can't possibly eat enough to handle that. So the whole point of recovery is to break down the body and then use your recovery concepts and your nutrition concepts to heal the body to be able to be strong the next workout. Now, if you don't do that, that's how you lead to overtraining, overreaching, injury, right? Your tissue's not prepared. Your tissue's not recovered. Soft tissue damage. That's when you hear people pulled muscles and strains, or you just hear people say, man, I'm tired all day long. I'm tired at the gym all the time. That's to me I just don't feel good in the gym all the time. So to answer that person's question, what is happening with recovery is basically just healing the body with your nutrients and your technique so you can train again the next day. Is that kind of an easy way to say that?
Certainly.
Okay.
But I think there's a fine line here. Like we don't want to promote too much that the idea of you have to be completely recovered and,
True. Yeah.
and zero soreness before you go into this next session.
Yeah.
It is a fine line between recovery from the previous session to a certain point, and then you actually drop down from that next initial session where you enter into more fatigue. And this is the idea behind SRA curves, stimulus recovery adaptation, or it's also known as Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome model, which is basically you have a stressor which promotes a stress response within the body, and then over time, if that stress response continues, you will no longer be able to facilitate an adequate defense against it or an adequate reaction to it, and then because of that, your performance will drop off. So in terms of training, your training session, your body perceives it as a stressor, obviously. And so then from that, during the session, you'll get this increase in catecholamines and other hormones where you'll be able to get through the session, hopefully, if everything is normal. And then coming out of that, you will actually see the performance will drop below where it started before the session. Subsequently, recovery, the idea is then you will peak above where you started before that first session if you allow for adequate regeneration.
So would that be kind of like super compensation?
Yeah, to a certain extent, and the idea of deloads and tapers and things like that is a macro scale for super compensation over the entire month, and then super compensation, if you want to call it that, from a session to session perspective, is more of the recovery regeneration idea.
So it's okay to be. You're going to be a little bit sore the next day. You're going to go into training sessions and be sore. All right, here's go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a good rule of thumb is if your soreness is to the point where it limits your movement or your general quality of life throughout the day, then you may just be in a really tough, overreaching, high volume phase, or you may have just done too much the last session that you may need to scale back and take that extra recovery day. But that's generally a good metric. I mean, if you can barely sit down in a chair, like you probably shouldn't squat again that same day.
I got a good story. I one time did a quarter mile of walking lunges, a full quarter mile of walking lunges. And I literally probably considered going to the emergency room 2 days later. I'm not kidding, bro. I mean, it was really bad. It was like I would walk and my legs would lock and I would almost fall down like 2 days later. It was sore to the touch. It was one of the worst. I mean, it was the closest I've ever had to having
rhabdomyolysis.
Yeah. Closest I've ever come to having rhabdo, and I've never done it again. But if we're moving on and we go look at something like, here's a big one, right? Post-workout recovery drinks.
Mm-hmm.
Do they actually help? And we get this all the time, right? Does chocolate milk help?
Mm-hmm.
Does drinking a protein shake after a workout actually help? One thing I want you to touch on, and I've done a lot of research on this, is the anabolic window,
mm-hmm.
right? And how many times have you heard crap about the anabolic window, right? How many times people say you got to have food within 20 minutes,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The only reason I eat right away after a workout, like right away, is because when I was at a high volume of calories, I had to eat right away so I could eat again 3 hours later, so I could eat again 3 hours later, right?
Because you just get food in.
It's just you can't skip 2 hours of not eating because it's 10 o'clock at night and you're like, oh my God, I got to do 800, 900 calories at 10 o'clock at night.
Yep.
That's just not possible with quality food. I don't care who you're dealing with. So explain because I've heard people say this. I worked out, I got to come right home and eat, and then I'm going to go out and run my errands because I have to eat right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
They say things like that. And I don't know who it was. Was it Brad Schoenfeld that said it? I can't remember who it was. Somebody said it's okay after your workout to go run like a couple 30-minute of your errands and then eat your post-workout meal. It's okay.
Sure.
Like you're not going to have a panic attack, freak out, lose all your gains because you missed your 20-minute anabolic window.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely.
I kind of laugh at that all the time when you see the guys hammering all those calories because they're like, don't want to miss my anabolic window, right? Talk to people about the importance of a post-workout shake, even if there is one. What your thoughts are on chocolate milk. You're probably going to piss some people off with the chocolate milk comment, right? And that's okay. But science says what science says. Does a post-workout shake actually help? What do you think about chocolate milk? And after a really hard workout, how much time do you think you really have to get your post-workout meal in?
Sure. So with the quote-unquote anabolic window, it's really much longer than just an hour or two after the workout. The quote-unquote anabolic window is more so the next 24 to 48 hours preceding that training session. And in less experienced individuals, it's going to be much longer. There's some studies showing that muscle protein synthesis is still elevated 48 hours after that session. In more experienced individuals, it will turn over that much quicker. As that's an adaptation to training, that you'll get that turnover within the cellular level that much faster. But with the actual idea of the anabolic window after training and the post-workout recovery, you have to consider when do we eat our last meal prior to training. So let's say I ate lunch 12 noon and I'm going for a training session at 4:30 or 5 and I got off work. Ideally, in that sense, if we ate just a normal lunch, not an extremely large meal, then digestion is going to last about 3 to 5 hours, and those amino acids are going to be circulating in your bloodstream and moving into your digestive tract. Now, if we're really looking to maximize hypertrophy and maximize our adaptations within the gym, we really want to have amino acids circulating within the bloodstream sooner rather than later from the training session. So if we can bump that meal closer to the training session, that will then prolong the digestion of those nutrients through the training session. And then after that, the quote-unquote anabolic window isn't necessarily as big of a deal. Now, the other thing you can consider is actually taking in nutrients during the training session. So if you've eaten a meal beforehand, immediately before the training session, not as big of a deal. But let's say you train in the morning or you've got a long gap since your previous meal, if you can take in some sort of protein and carbohydrate beverage during the actual training session, I touched on this in the last podcast, but you're actually going to find that there's a lot of benefits hormonally as well as physiologically. For one, there's something called a TC ratio, testosterone and cortisol, and that will actually somewhat decrease the transient cortisol output during the session and allow testosterone to remain a bit more stable, whereas typically those two are kind of inversely changing during the workout. And then also there's another factor within the immune system where individuals who train a lot and train intensely get more upper respiratory tract infections. So typically after a training session, your immune system will be decreased in terms of its ability to fight off bacteria and other pathogenic viruses. So if you can take in carbohydrates during the session, that will actually decrease what's called that exercise-mediated immune depression. So those two are very important just from a health and a long-term adaptation standpoint. And then the final point is there's this neat little thing called GLUT4, and it basically transports carbs from your bloodstream into your muscle fiber. And this is basically only upregulated during activity. So if you really want to give yourself the best opportunity to transport those carbs into your muscle fiber and really resynthesize glycogen as fast as possible during the session, or perhaps not during the session, but after the session, if you want to keep blood sugar as stable as possible during the session, your best bet then would be to take in some sort of protein and some sort of carb. Now, you're not going to need to use, 100 grams of carbs from Gatorade or something like that. You're generally looking for somewhere in the vicinity of around 1 gram, probably every 2 minutes, something like that for your session. So it's really not going to be a whole lot, like 30 grams for like an hour-long session. Really not a huge amount. And in terms of protein, if you're a larger individual, you're probably looking at anywhere from 25 to 35 grams, smaller individual, 20 to 25. But generally those two, if you can put them in during the training session, it definitely helps to, I don't know if you want to say shorten the anabolic window, but it almost completely removes it because then you're having nutrients during the training session. After the training session, I just tell people, hey, whenever you get hungry, if that's 2 hours out or 1 hour out, that's when you can have a meal, whatever fits your lifestyle.
I like that.
Really, that's all we're looking for. And the last point that I would mention is if you do eat a meal, let's say you ate lunch at 12 and you're training at 4, the meal that you ate at 12, the size of it and the overall macronutrient composition will determine when you should eat again and how quickly it will digest. So 3 to 5 hours is a good basic rule of thumb for overall digestion and motility of a meal through the GI tract. But if the meal is larger in terms of protein, total fat content, fiber content, or perhaps all three, then we're going to have much slower motility and digestion. So let's say you eat like a huge steak burrito from Chipotle and you got like guac and sour cream and cheese on it and things like that. Like you're probably not going to be hungry for one, but that still may be digesting at 4 o'clock and it's not as big of a deal. So you really have to consider the context of the situation and think about when did I eat last? If I haven't eaten that recently, hey, maybe I can do something during the session and then I don't have to sweat after the session as much.
Sure. So what are your thoughts on the post-workout shake?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. Now, here's what I do. Okay. Here's this, just me. My post-workout meal, granted, I try to eat 6 meals a day and it's hard to get a lot of food in, is usually 3 to 1 carbs to protein.
Mm-hmm.
So 90 grams of carbs, 30 grams of protein, somewhere around that. Mm-hmm. Usually like a lot of granola and 30 grams of whey protein. That's what I do, right? Touch on, if you really want to look at recovery, touch on this. One, how do you feel about a recovery shake drink after? What are your thoughts on chocolate milk, real quick? And touch on why you need carbs post-workout. Because I've seen so many people post-workout just do protein.
Sure.
Touch on that real quick.
Okay. So with a protein shake in general, one of the things that you, two things really that you need to consider. The first being, there's some research showing that you do get a disruption, so to speak, in terms of the GI mucosa and the ability to effectively, I won't say absorb, but it alters your normal digestion. And what happens there is typically most of the blood gets shunted away from the digestive tract to the working muscles. But you not only get changes in micro tears within the muscle, but you can get some inflammation systemically within the whole body. So with protein shakes, one of the, not issues, but one of the things you need to be mindful of is unlike typical foods that you'll be chewing, with a protein shake, there is no chewing. Digestion begins in the mouth with something called salivary amylase, which breaks down carbohydrates. But if you are just then swallowing that beverage and consuming that beverage without any chewing, you also don't secrete pancreatic enzymes within the digestive tract, and chewing also stimulates natural production of stomach HCl or stomach acid. So if you can, like I always recommend, hey, if you're going to make a protein shake after the session, throw in some sort of fruit or something that requires you to chew, like chia seeds or nuts or something like that that are just ground up, just so that you can get a little bit of that mastication to promote stomach acid production and production of pancreatic enzymes to facilitate digestion even further. So I think immediately just slamming down the weights and then throwing back this protein shake, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, but there could be issues in terms of digestion. With digestion because of what's occurring with the GI tract and because of the fact that there is not that normal mastication, swallowing, digestion process. So that's where protein shakes can become a little bit iffy. So I would say if you can go more the protein smoothie route and throw in some different stuff, so it makes it a little bit thicker, there you go. Now with chocolate milk, it can be beneficial in a pinch. So for those who just need something on the run, or let's say you got a large team that you're dealing with, not much of a budget, that can definitely be beneficial. I think the one thing you need to consider is many people are not aware of what proper digestion of dairy products feels like. And so if someone is getting, intestinal distress with that, so gas, bloating, change in stool composition immediately after, or even subsequently within the next 5 or 6 hours, there may be an issue there, maybe not with a dairy allergy, but perhaps a dairy intolerance or sensitivity, and they're just not paying attention to it, and they think, well, this is quick, this is easy, I'll just go with this. So chocolate milk I don't necessarily have a huge deal with, as long as the person is mindful and pays attention to kind of how that recovery beverage makes them feel after the session.
So to wrap it up, it's all context-based, right? If you can eat a meal post-workout, highly recommended.
Depending upon when you ate before, yeah.
If you have to do a shake, get some sort of fruit or something in there where you have to chew and go through the natural eating digestion process. And then, I know a lot of guys that are in high school strength and conditioning, college strength and conditioning, and they brought in chocolate milk. And they'd post about chocolate milk for their teams, and all these people would come in and just bash them for bringing chocolate milk. And I'm kind of like, hey, man, it's all context. It's better than nothing.
Sure, 100%.
And it's all context related. You got to feed 70 football players in a small college, and some grocery store wants to donate 70 bottles of chocolate milk to the team every day. Use your chocolate milk. Right? Like, I mean, it's not going to kill you. It's better than these kids going home, studying, and not eating until 8 o'clock. Like, I think you're fine. Right? Here's another big time context related number 3 that we had, and this came, and I know who this came from. Actually, the first person that ever had me do jujitsu was a good friend of mine. Lives in Texas. His name's Joe, and I believe he had this question. And Joe loves to train jujitsu, owns CrossFit gym, wants to get big. I mean, he's a balls of the wall guy. And how many days does somebody's body really need to recover? Big question, right? It's so dependent on so many things. He said, and this guy said, I'm at the body where my body doesn't seem to recovering quick. I feel mentally exhausted as much as I do physically. I've decided to take this weekend off working out to see if time helps recovery. And you kind of made some comments on this. Age does affect this. I'm 40. I do not, dude, when I was 28 years old, 29, I would train jujitsu 3 or 4 days a week, lift 3 or 4 days a week, sleep 6 hours a day. And I didn't understand it was amazing. Now that I'm 40, if I did that, bro, I would be on the floor in my bed crying by 6 o'clock on the 3rd day because I would be like depressed. I'd have overtraining symptoms. I would be crying. I wouldn't be able to eat. Like I would just, my cortisol. I mean, I'd be a wreck. Right. How does age affect this? I did touch on, we've had people ask us about SARMs, right? It's natural. It's out there. I got no problem talking about it as long as we tell people what it is. I don't have a problem with education. Active recovery protocol for this person.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of cardiovascular work,
Yep.
stretching, foam rolling.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a big question. I think this third question probably wraps up most people's concern. Does foam rolling and stretching help? Does light cardiovascular work? How many days should I train? Why don't I feel as good as I used to?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I know that's a packed question,
Mm-hmm.
but can you kind of roll that into maybe an explanation of what goes on in your body, why somebody needs time to recover, how age affects it, and how you don't have to train 7 days a week to see results?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the total amount of time that one would need to recover from an individual session depends on how large the homeostatic disruption, basically the change from the current status quo to the current equilibrium, truly is. So a much larger disruption will then require more recovery. So, for example, if someone goes through like an overreaching block, which is essentially where you just jack up the volume and jack up the intensity, that typically is then followed by anywhere from 7 to 14 days of complete time off before someone moves into a sports-specific competition. And really what we think about within the fitness sector is somebody goes through a training session, and it might just be brutal where you see, for example, CrossFit. You see some individuals who are just laying on the floor afterwards, just wrecked. And they think, well, 6 hours later, I don't feel as bad, but I still don't feel recovered. And then the next day, same sort of thing. They just go right back into it again. Mm-hmm. And really, they're just redlining it in sixth gear and then wondering, it seems like my snatch never goes up, my clean and jerk never goes up. But that disruption is so large every time that they're barely getting back to baseline. If that, it may be slightly lower than baseline before then they go and dip down below it again. So a couple things that definitely affect this. Number one being exogenous supplements or substances, whatever you want to call them. SARMs, as you touched on. SARMs are what are referred to as selective androgen receptor modulators, basically meaning that they are like anabolic steroids. They have similar effects, but the action or their influence at the cellular level is that much more targeted, so there's much less negative side effects. So those have gotten really big in popularity lately. We won't.
I'm seeing them everywhere. Yeah. I'm seeing people talk about them on websites, podcasts, articles, because one thing we do know about androgens are that they work, right? People use them. Powerlifters, athletes, bodybuilders, the baseball player that just got caught, A-Rod, those hitting home runs in the late 90s, they did it because it works, right? But I think people need to be aware of, and this is where me and you touched on it, they need to be aware of you have to be educated on what you're putting in your body, right? Highly educated. And because there is a I don't care what you take, there is a long-term effect for everything that you put in your body over time. I don't care what it is. There is a effect to your body, negative or positive, of everything we put into our body over time. I truly believe that. So I guess I was just throwing my 2 cents in on that.
Sure. Yeah. So again, steroids or SARMs or any sort of exogenous substance that you are using is going to create the largest difference. Because really, I'll break it down later. I have a hierarchy of recovery that I'll go through, but really at the baseline is hormones, 110%. The more that we can understand how hormones interact, what things cause hormones to change, for example, steroids, that's the biggest factor. The more that we can alter those in a beneficial manner, then obviously the greater adaptation we can promote, and the faster the adaptation we can promote, thus we can train more quickly and recover more quickly. So active recovery protocols, you see everything from, pool workouts, cardiovascular work, contrast showers. So I'm going to break down some individual ones, talk through them, and really just give people an idea of all the different things they can do and just some very simple specifics along with each one. So the first thing, as we talked about before, it's somewhat an active recovery protocol, but as we mentioned with nutrition can play a big role. with the TC ratio and everything else. If we have carbs after the session, like you mentioned before, can we just have a protein shake? If we can include carbs, that will help to drive down cortisol and then give us more of a beneficial hormonal swing. Again, tying back into our first point. Second thing is pool workouts. So these are essentially non-weight bearing, gives you an opportunity to run, underwater, swim, cardiovascular work, as you touched on. Mm-hmm. We're really looking for any sort of modality, which hopefully is non-weight bearing, like a rower or a bike, and anything which generates a light sweat. Generally, you're looking for somewhere between 120 to 140 beats per minute. So if you have a heart rate monitor, that's the zone that you're looking to stay in. It's going to feel really easy and way too light, but that's exactly what we're looking for. And cardiovascular work can help in terms of balancing neurotransmitters, which can, like dopamine and serotonin, which can get a little skewed with heavier training, especially in the long term. But it also enhances something called neuroplasticity, which is basically one's ability to learn motor patterns. And if you look at the research on fatigue and training in general, as fatigue accumulates, one's ability to learn and then demonstrate motor patterns or specific movements that they're learning will go down. So, for example, if someone's a CrossFit athlete and they're trying to improve their snatch technique or things like that, adding in some low-intensity work on their off days, just a light sweat, can perhaps stimulate this neuroplasticity factor, which is generally highest in youth and then declines with age. So anything that you can do to hopefully improve that will then lead to improvements in technique and then execution of the movements during the session. NSAIDs, this is a big one. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, Tylenol,
ibuprofen.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people pop these after a workout. They're just like, man, my quads are crushed. I did way too much squatting. But there's some research showing that this could potentially be an issue as inflammation inflammation in general is needed to promote hypertrophy, but also tissue repair. So if you're taking something to actually dull that natural inflammatory
100%,
response
100%.
And reduce this cytokine output that your immune system is trying to have, then you can start to run into some issues. So just something to keep in the back of people's minds that, if I'm really sore, let's stick to more heat and movement. And I'll break that down. Really, we're not looking for ice in terms of recovery from a training session. Ice can be very beneficial if there's an acute injury within 6 hours of the actual event itself. So you'll see some athletic trainers who will recommend the person ices, for the next 4 days after an injury or things like that. Above and beyond 6 hours out from an immediate injury, you're not getting any additional benefit from the ice.
So let me throw this at you. I come from the world of baseball, right?
Yep.
I've trained a lot of baseball guys, right? And I've never met a group of people who have thrown out science and have gone with pure anecdotal evidence in their training like I have baseball people, especially pitchers, right? Mm-hmm. So, we always get the hey, if you pitch a lot, you built up lactic acid, you need to go run to get rid of the lactic acid. Well, what has the research said? 1, pitching doesn't build lactic acid, and 2, running doesn't get rid of it. But it's all anecdotal evidence, and I've had this conversation with 1,000 people, and I just say, I'm sorry, but I believe in science. And I'm sorry your coach in 1973 made you run 18 poles after you pitched. It did nothing to you other than piss you off.
Yep.
Right? Yep. And here's the other thing I saw. If they would pitch, they would take ibuprofen and ice. And I'm talking kids taking up to 2,400 milligrams of ibuprofen on the day of and day after from pitching. Yep. So they would pitch, and I would say, "Are you hurt?" They're like, "No." Okay. Why are you icing if you're not hurt? And why are you taking ibuprofen if there's no acute pain? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
And so I totally agree with what you're saying. Unless you are actually injured, right? If you are into the habit of taking ibuprofen after every workout, you have to pump the brakes and back up as to why are you in pain after every workout, right?
100%.
And why do you feel like you have to ice? So I love the idea of what you say is movement and heat. Mm-hmm. So that's where the light cardiovascular comes into play, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And really what you're looking for with that movement perspective is we're not only trying to influence delivery of nutrients within the blood supply itself. So anytime you're getting movement and heat, you're getting vasodilation, which is improving overall blood flow to an area. But you're also trying to enhance the lymphatic system, which is basically this additional system along with your blood supply, which will enhance recovery overall at a cellular level. And anytime you're getting compression at a joint or within the muscle in terms of contraction generating compression, or for example, if you've seen the Normatec recovery gear, which causes this constriction or compression around the muscle, basically what that's trying to do is it's trying to enhance lymphatic flow back to the heart by squeezing the extremities to pump it out of the extremities. So if you can do that naturally on your own with something as simple as going for a walk or biking or rowing and just getting a nice light sweat, very easy.
So if you're really hurting from workouts, go move. A little bit. Right. What are your thoughts on? So there's train of thoughts, and again, foam rolling. Okay. Do you foam roll before a workout? Do you foam roll after a workout? And what are your thoughts on what we're seeing a lot with really heavy compression, like mashing, right? You're seeing a lot of people mash. I have a friend of mine, phenomenal physical therapist. I'm not going to tell him his name. He's on here. He might pop in and comment if he wants. He is actually pretty associated to Gray Cook and what they're doing. And this guy, I mean, this guy's great, right? He's practical. He spoke at a national level, and he's actually said to me before, he's like, I'm not sure if just mashing something really solves the problem, right? It's got to be more than that. So what are your thoughts on compression? My friend Mark McClure loves the he posts that little vibrating, that thing. And then he's used it for years. I know he's used it when he lived in South Carolina with us. What are your thoughts on just basic? We'll just touch on foam rolling. Okay. Before or after workout? Sure.
Yeah. So I think we could throw massage in with foam rolling because it's kind of tissue manipulation at the same time. There is some good research showing that massage can help promote recovery of the neuromuscular system and dissipate these kind of perceptions of fatigue, that you're feeling tired and your overall soreness level. With foam rolling itself, I think one of the things we need to consider is foam rolling can tend to generate more of a parasympathetic nervous system response, which is more of your rest and digest, your recovery symptom or your recovery side of things. And so doing that before a session could keyword, potentially change the state of the central nervous system slightly, not saying totally, but slightly, to the point where then you might see a slight decrease in performance. That's not to say you will. I haven't seen any direct research on it, but the hypothetical idea or the mechanism potentially is that if you shift into more of a relaxed state, then the central nervous system won't generate as high of a force output. So I like it more post-workout, but I really like it actually before bed. So I have a lot of my online clients, if they're really keyed up and wired up during the day, I'm like, hey, foam roll for 10 or 15 minutes before you go to sleep and then take a shower. And that accomplishes two different things. One is hopefully they can't be on any sort of electronic device for that 10 or 15 minutes, and they can't be on one in the shower. So total there, we're getting a nice little gap of 30 to 45 minutes where they're not on any electronics, no blue light, obviously improves the sleep. But then at the same time, we're getting that parasympathetic improval or increase in vagal tone, decrease in sympathetic tone, and then hopefully both of those combined improves the sleep overall.
It's interesting you say that. I have one kid, phenomenal athlete who trained, and he would foam roll and lacrosse ball 30 minutes before a workout. And I always was nervous about talking to him about if we're going to go into a sprinting exercise or like a dynamic type exercise. I said, do it if you feel good for a couple minutes, just maybe a ritual. But I said, I have a hard time with suppressing the nervous system and then then immediately asking the nervous system to be on point.
Yep.
Right? That up and down of the nervous system, one, it's going to affect coordination. Two, you're going to have some issues. I mean, shutting a muscle off and then asking it to turn back on dynamically, I don't like that whole idea, right? That just sounds damage to me. So I see injury coming with that. So foam rolling at night or after workout to suppress the nervous system, I love that idea. Or how do you feel about on those days off? Say you do a little bit of that cardiovascular work and then foam roll?
Yeah, I like foam rolling and massage too from also a reset perspective. So if somebody is let's say they're working a job where they're on their feet a lot during the day and they're on hard surfaces, that person could potentially be biasing more of an extension position, and putting them on a foam roll can hopefully then get some down regulation in that neural tone to specific muscle groups. And I think that's the thing we have to remember with the smashing or the foam rolling. If someone has to continually foam roll or smash an area with whatever implement they're using, and that area continues to feel tight, then there is something centrally mediated that they're not checking out, whether it be a positioning issue or a technique issue of an exercise. So let's say, for example, you're back squatting, and the day after you back squat, you wake up and you can barely get out of bed and lean over to tie your shoes. There's probably an issue there. You got some butt wink going on, or you're potentially overextending and overcompensating. But the issue is not going to be fixed by foam rolling. The issue is going to be fixed by correcting the exercise itself. So foam rolling, I think a lot of people have relied on as a crutch. Hey, I'll just crush myself during my session, and then I'll just buff it all out, when really you're not changing anything within the tissue itself. You're actually just decreasing neural tone or neural input to the tissue, and it's quieting down, and you're thinking, oh, I just, what's the phrase? Scar tissue. What do people say? I broke up the scar tissue. You're not changing anything.
Have you ever really had scar tissue broken up?
No,
it's not pleasant.
If you open up a cadaver and you're trying to quote unquote break up scar tissue, you literally need a scalpel to do that. So Lord. I highly doubt that a cylindrical piece of foam is going to do anything, but you will get scar tissue within the nervous system, and that's really what benefit you're going for. So in terms of the hardcore smashing, like these big rollers that people are putting on each other now, I think some of those people are just so keyed up neurologically that they can't shut it off with something like a soft, lower density foam roller. And maybe that's what they need, at least transiently, to kind of get things to calm down. But I think in the long term, they might want to look at other factors that they can address in terms of what's your sleep like, what's your caffeine intake like. Let's throw on Slayer or Disturb and take 3 scoops of C4 and then see how tight your muscles feel like before your session. Well, no, duh. Like, you just cranked up neurological tone. So again, consider the entire 24 hours of the day and then say, maybe we don't need to do this 30-minute session of smashing if we just change these other factors.
Yeah. Well, one thing people need to understand too is just because a muscle's tight doesn't mean that it has to be loosened up, right? Sometimes their tone is there as a protection.
Wasn't that Pete Bomarito? He said, what was it? Weakness is secondary to, what was it? From Summer Strong. What did he say? Did I lose you?
All right.
Josh, you still there?
We're back.
You good? Can you hear me?
Let's see if we might have to bring Mike back on here.
Josh, can you hear me? Are we good? Can you hear me?
Yep, I got you.
All right. Sorry about that.
So no. That was B Live. But one of the issues that we see with people is a lot of pars fractures, right? And you see it swimming, pitching, rotation, overtraining. People get pars fractures, and we'd see a lot of at athletes' arena. We'd see a lot of kids coming off pars fractures, and they would have tight hamstrings. Well, just because it's tight doesn't mean you mash it. Doesn't mean you have to stretch it. It's there as protective. So one thing people need to understand, and this is for people maybe an advanced person in fitness or sports performance, just because it's tight doesn't mean you have to stretch it. Very important. if that hamstring is there to protect that lumbar spine because you have some ability, and you go ahead and stretch it, that might be more detrimental than anything, right?
I think it was Bomarito that said tightness is secondary to weakness, wasn't it?
Yeah. He said. Didn't he say that at Summer Strong?
Yeah.
And that dude's trained some studs. Was like over 100 NFL athletes. Mm-hmm. Moving on, number 4. And I know exactly who this guy is. I haven't stopped training for 13 months. I feel like I need to deload and allow my body to recoup. I think the gist of this is the connection between training and nutrition. Personally, that's what I commented. Mm-hmm. I personally don't deload for hypertrophy. I manage volume and calories, but no real deload.
Yep.
Right. One, explain this. Do you and how? I guess address the issue of deload. Do you have to have it?
Sure.
Do you need it? And how can you avoid not having to have a deload?
So for a hypertrophy individual, somebody who just cares about how jacked and tan can I get and how quickly can I do it, the thing that you really need to consider is there is 2 competing cellular pathways within the muscle. One is called AMPK, AMP kinase, and one is called mTOR. And mTOR is really all that bodybuilders and strength athletes per se care about, or fitness enthusiasts. AMPK is more so all of your endurance adaptations. So they're really competing pathways, so to speak. But one of the things that you need to consider is if you're constantly training with a high volume, high threshold output, one of the things that we see over time is that AMPK will actually start to increase in terms of the overall cellular activity, and mTOR will then subsequently decrease because it's kind of a trade-off there. With higher repetition sets, you'll find that there are more type 1 fiber activation and more type 1 fiber hypertrophy because initially what you're going to have is you will run through all of your type 2s as fatigue begins to set in, and then the type 1s, which are more fatigue resistant, will then follow up and take over. But with that, somebody might say, it's more time under tension, it's more hypertrophy, it's more volume within the muscle. Yes, to a certain extent, but as AMPK levels begin to come up, mTOR will subsequently come down. So the purpose of a deload, whether you want to think about it from a neurological restoration standpoint in terms of overall recovery, you can also think about it from a physiological or cellular reset, so to speak, in terms of allowing AMP to come back down and mTOR to come back up. And so that's one of the very important reasons why for a deload, you mainly want to cut volume and probably not intensity. So you're looking at a reduction in volume of about 60 to, I would say, almost 70%, and you're probably not going to change intensity a whole lot. Volume is the main driver of peripheral fatigue, whereas intensity is the main driver of neurological fatigue. So if you have an individual who is more of focused on the powerlifting side of things, or let's say they compete in a sport which is highly full for deloads, you're really looking at reducing volume and trying to keep intensity up. And one of the interesting ideas from a sports-specific perspective is Dr. Stone actually touched upon this. If you look at tapers for specific sports, what you're going to find is during the increase in volume, you will see that you get a increase in cross-sectional area of the muscle, but rate of force development will go down. So rate of force development is typically correlated with fatigue. So as fatigue goes up, volume goes up, rate of force development comes down. You add in that taper or that deload, now what we see is there's actually a rise in rate of force development, volume comes down. But one of the interesting things is you get an overshoot in type 2X fibers. So you actually get a larger conversion of type 2As to type 2Xs. And type 2Xs are highly correlated with rate of force development. So it's somebody who is more of a power or strength athlete and they're looking to peak for meet or peak for a competition, this can be incredibly beneficial from an overall deload perspective.
So one thing I know about this person is that they've been dieting and training for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. I listened to a podcast recently with Mike Israetel, and he talked about how he will take a microcycle, like a 4-week microcycle. The only thing, he'll work out hard, he'll have fun in the gym, but the only thing he'll count is his protein intake, right? So for 4 weeks, he literally lives a normal, somewhat typical lifestyle to allow for that mental deload. Have fun in the gym, do the exercises you like, anything except maybe your protein for about 4 weeks. Eat. If your friends want to go eat, go eat. If you want to eat something in the house, go eat it. Don't be gluttonous, right? But using that almost like a deload, right? And then he talked about kind of what you said. He'll take that microcycle and do a little dip in volume, right? And then come right back up. So it's not like he's cutting a whole cycle of 50%. I think sometimes people who diet and track their workouts and track all that, Mike made a really good point. Sometimes you need a 4-week period for a mental deload.
Oh, yeah.
A 4 to 6 weeks of like, oh my God, I'm not, oh my Lord, my MyFitnessPal app went down. We're screwed, right? Taking that 4 weeks to do it. And then I think the other thing, and I don't know if you touched on it, we lost for maybe 10 seconds when I touched on it. As volume goes up, right, you have to increase nutrition intake, right? I mean, that's part of avoiding, because I know when I was going to go through this little cut in weight, I was going to ramp up some reps, and you were like, no, go the other direction.
Yep.
Because you're not going to recover. So I think able to avoid that deload and really overtrain, nutrition and volume have to match.
Definitely.
For you to be able to do that and not get hurt. So if you're looking at someone that has done and they are feeling like they need that deload, it's not a bad recommendation to say, hey, dude, take a month of just maybe tracking some protein, working out 4 days a week, go have some fun, eat some food, and come back to it in a month.
I think there's a lot of people who approach lifting from a athletic perspective where they hold themselves to the same standard as perhaps some collegiate or even professional athletes.
Yeah.
They have this mindset of, I have to go in every single day, I have to give it 110%. But what they don't realize is if you look at some of the Olympic weightlifters, like, for example, some of the Russian teams, following the world championships in weightlifting, some of them will take up to 2 months completely off of active rest where they would do something totally unrelated to weightlifting and they won't even pick up a barbell at all. And so I think sometimes people forget that, like, these professional athletes will have time periods where they will either be doing active rest, or they'll be doing something active that's not pertaining to their sport or pertaining to lifting, or they're going to be having these down weeks. Like, for example, at ETSU, every single 4-week block, we always have a down week where volume always comes down, regardless of whether they're feeling good or whether they're like, yeah, I'm making progress. And sometimes for people that are just 100% pedal to the metal all the time, you have to say every 4th week, it's coming down. Yeah. Sorry. Intensity will stay up, but you just won't get as much volume.
Part of that is it's glorified, right? How many people are like, oh, Billy crushed his competition on a Friday and he's so dedicated he was back training in Monday. And you hear that and, they say that Russell Wilson, he might have lost this weekend in his NBA in the playoffs, but I bet he was back in the gym on Monday. Well, if he was, he's an idiot, right? Like let's not glorify, the guy that's like, oh, he did the CrossFit Games on a Saturday and he didn't do as good. I bet he was back doing Murph on Monday. You know what? I really doubt that guy's probably pretty smart and pretty dialed into his body.
Yeah.
He probably ate some nachos, slept, watched some Seinfeld reruns, and didn't walk into the gym for a while. Yeah. Right?
So moving on. I was going to say, I think in this person's case, give themselves that month time period and really see how they feel after that month of scaling things back, both in training for the sport and lifting. And if at the end of that month, they're like, something still doesn't feel right, I definitely don't feel motivated, I don't feel like I have energy in the gym, can't recover. Yeah. At that point in time, I think that's where you say, hey, I need to go get some blood work done. I need to figure out where I'm at from this foundational point, hormones, and work from there.
Yeah, I agree. Let's finish out. Let's kind of double hit this one, okay? This is an answer of the honest question. This is yes, and we all know the answer to this is yes. Does daily structure and does it affect your stress level and therefore affect your recovery? Mm-hmm. Right. So basically, if you have a high stress job, you're on your feet all day. Maybe you work construction. Maybe you have a high pressure situation at work. Maybe a high pressure situation at your family. Maybe you have the opposite. Maybe you have a laid back job. You work from home. Whatever. Does structure, habits, and daily routines help eliminate stress and therefore increase recovery? Can you do things on a daily basis that help with recovery? And then this is the big ender. Hierarchy of recovery. Mm-hmm. Give me your hierarchy of recovery of what's the first thing everybody needs to do, and what's the next important, then the next important, then the next important.
Sure.
And then we'll kind of close it out.
Okay. So with the structure and daily habits, I think the first thing you have to consider, it depends on what your daily habits are. So if you're the type of person where your daily habits are, like you said, staying up on Facebook till 1 a.m., or you got buddies that constantly want to go out and they want to do stuff late at night, your habits and your overall daily routines, I think, are going to be influenced by four main things. One being your environment. Two being your social support, kind of who's around you. What's that famous quote? You're a combination of the 5 people that are closest to you, around you, that you hang out with the most. And I think availability. What do you have access to on a daily basis in terms of what's your job like, in terms of hours that you have available during the day? What's your family status like? Do you have any kids? Are you in school? Yeah. And then the final one being your priorities. I think you're always going to make time for that thing which is a priority. So if recovery is a priority to you, training is a priority to you, the two are synergistic. They have to go hand in hand. You can't just say, man, I'm all about the gym, but I don't really care about nutrition. I'm all about nutrition, but I don't really care about recovery. Yeah. Because it's this triangle which everything works together hand in hand. We neglect one of it, things start to fall apart. So I definitely think those 4 are the main drivers of your daily habits. And interestingly enough, I was reading a book by a Navy SEAL. His name is Jocko Willink. And he had a quote in there, discipline equals freedom. And he said that he was inspired to take this approach with his whole SEAL team because he noticed that those individuals who are the highest performers in society were also the ones who had the most disciplined morning routines, interestingly enough. Kind of waking up, had their day set, were prepared for the day. And then from that, they were able to make decisions without feeling like things were out of their control because they were already prepared for it. Now, obviously, again, you don't want to neglect sleep and say, well, I'm just going to wake up 3 hours earlier to make sure that I have my day planned out and I'm in control. Yeah. Some of this is going to be a time management thing, but some of it is going to be a priority thing. So if you wake up and the first thing you do is pick up your phone, check Instagram, check Facebook, check Snapchat, check Twitter, well, there you go. You probably just ate up 45 minutes to an hour that we could have been doing something else like sleeping more or potentially working on things that you're going to do later in the day, which would give you an opportunity to go to bed earlier. So I definitely think they can reduce stress. And I think it gives you the ability to function independently when you set parameters and you have guidelines for your quote unquote system, which you make decisions. And so, for example, nutrition, if you say, I am going to either, set up macros and calories, or I'm going to go by the palm of my hand and the fist for serving sizes, whatever system you use, as long as that system is in place, when something comes out of the norm and tries to encroach upon that system, you'll be much more prepared if you have something that's already in place in terms of your guidelines. So next question then, in terms of the hierarchy of recovery, as I mentioned earlier, I think at the base level, the foundational level, you're really always going to be dealing with hormones. And this is not only hormones that you can take exogenously, but also resting concentrations of hormones. So if we look at what does the person currently have right now in terms of free hormones and bound hormones, because you really can't just say, what is my total testosterone number? We also have to consider your free testosterone number, what's actually circulating in your body, what can be used. If it's bound up by something like sex hormone binding globulin, why is that? Let's investigate a little bit more. Let's dig into the functional medicine side of things. Next up, I think we're really, the key principle there is sleep, 100%. Not only quantity of sleep, but also quality of sleep and timing of sleep. I have a lot of athletes that come to me, hey, what time did you go to bed last night? I went to bed at 3 a.m., but I slept until 12. Well, the issue there, as the saying goes, 1 hour before 12 o'clock is worth 12 p.m. is worth 2 hours, 12 a.m. is worth 2 hours afterwards. So essentially you go to bed at 11 o'clock, it's worth 2 hours after 12 a.m. The idea is that you actually go through different stages of sleep throughout the course of the night, dependent upon when you go to bed, because circadian rhythms are functioning regardless of what you're doing. So if you're still awake at 12 p.m., there is a certain point then where you're going to go to sleep, but you may not enter into the deeper, more restorative stages of sleep. Those occur earlier on in the night, anywhere from 10 to 12 or 9 to 12, depending upon when you go to sleep. So we have to look at timing, quality, and quantity. Quality, does the person have sleep apnea? Maybe they don't know about it. What's their sleep hygiene like? What's the environment like? Is it loud? Is it noisy? All these we're going to break down in a future podcast on sleep, but I just want to put the idea in there, and rather than just people thinking, oh yeah, quality, quantity, timing, there is a huge microcosm that we have to investigate with sleep. Above and beyond that, in terms of our pyramid, now we're building up to the fourth tier, lifestyle. Perceived stress.
And real quick too, we should probably see if we can build like a little diagram.
I have one. I'm going to post it.
Or have something built. Yeah, post a diagram. That's good. Okay, go ahead.
Yep. Lifestyle, I think, is next above that, and you have to consider stress not only in a perceived format, but an actual format. So, like I touched on earlier, what sort of job is the person working? How often are they getting vacations? Do they have a family? Do they have a social support network? Do they have any financial concerns? Are they able to pay their bills? Are they in school? Are they studying for things like that? So stress can definitely play a huge role in terms of what is on you and the total accumulative allostatic burden. But you also have to consider, how does the person perceive that stress? So some people might have a ton of stuff on them, no big deal. And that's a lot based upon mindset, but then also kind of how they are handling the situation. Next up, nutrition. Total calories here is the main driver. And really what we're getting at is anabolism, growth versus catabolism breakdown. Like you touched on earlier, volume gets cranked up, you're probably going to have to move calories up. And again, as volume comes up, you might get more hypertrophy, more lean body mass, more cross-sectional area. Sweet. Now you're more metabolically active. Calories go up again. So it's just, it builds one upon another, but we really need to consider it there. Because if someone is in a deficit and they're saying, man, I'm feeling like crap, like I can never recover from workouts. Well, maybe you're either doing too much volume or you're just not eating enough, or a combination of the two. Maybe we add some more food, crank up your calories, reduce the volume in your workouts. Now you're at a better hormonal environment, base level again. All of a sudden, sweet, my body composition is improving. Yeah. And I did the opposite of what I thought I was supposed to do. Exactly.
We'll finish out and then I'll go ahead.
Next up, I think, is periodization in terms of looking at total training volume and then also tapers and deloads. So are we cranking back during certain periods of the year after we have high volume phases? If we're not, then you might find that some of that fatigue from a previous phase lingers into future phases. You might run the risk of potentially overreaching if you went into a really high volume phase coming out of like a normal block of training. So incorporating some sort of monitoring from a volume load perspective, and then also understanding how much to taper and how much to deload relative to the actual training block and the cumulative stress from that. The last two, and these can kind of go hand in hand at the top, but we need to consider some other smaller things on a micro scale. From a functional medicine perspective, is there some sort of latent infection that the individual is dealing with that they don't know about? So, for example, let's say they have candida overgrowth within their small intestine, SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, H. pylori. Let's say they have low stomach acid content. If that's the case, then they will not be absorbing nutrients from their food, and subsequently they may be taking a ton of calories, but they're not gaining weight. They're not feeling recovered. You
Feeling bloated.
Yeah, you are what you eat, digest, and assimilate. So it's not just about calories and macros. It's also about how efficiently you digest and utilize those calories. Again, considering the GI mucosa, do they have increased intestinal permeability? If so, then they're going to have an inflamed GI mucosa, very hard to absorb nutrients, very hard to actually utilize many of the supplements that they're taking in, whether that be things like vitamins, antioxidants, fish oil, all things like this. So then the final tier is, again, supplementation. This is probably going to contribute the least amount, but it could play into that nutritional block if somebody is using things like carbohydrate and protein during the training session. So again, that's kind of your whole structure. I know that's a lot, so people may have gotten lost, but I'll post up the diagram in the group so people can see it.
Well, yeah, let's see that diagram. It's interesting that the last one was supplementation. Because how many people do you know? Dude, I'm part of a lot of groups and text message groups and Facebook groups, and you hear people talk about things they're doing with their diet, things they're doing in their. Man, I can't tell you how many times the first thing they bring up is, I'm changing my supplement routine. And you're like, yeah, okay, so you're covering 2% of what you need to deal with, right? So your supplements, right? And there's so many other things, like maybe your programming sucks, right? Your flat out programming sucks. Your sleep sucks. Your food sucks. All of that suck. And your supplements aren't going to do anything except maybe give you a really cool looking gym bag when you walk into the gym because you got 15 bottles of crap. Right? And that brings up what we're going to start next. Our next conversation, we're going to talk about supplements, right? I'm so skeptical about everything in the supplement industry. Man, if you listen to Lyle McDonald's, I like him because he's so mean and rude to people. It's almost entertaining. It's like a stand-up comedy. He's so rude to his members. I'm like, how do you have 15,000 members when you're so rude to everybody? Right? You're so rude to these people. And one of the funny things that they talk about on there is somebody mentions HMB or glutamine. Yep. Or, people say, well, glutamine is the most abundant supplement or amino acid, so I'm going to take a boatload. And there's a thread of like 13 people hammering this person. Or someone saying something about HMB, and then they just hammer. I mean, it's entertaining, but there's so much junk that the supplements. First of all, it's unregulated, so you have no clue what's in it. Second, do they really do as advertised? Do they work? Are they worth your money? And one thing I really like about this page and this podcast that we're talking about is exercise, nutrition, and sleep. Those aren't just for your gym bro, your athlete, your person that wants to get down to 7% body fat, or your person that wants to do CrossFit Games, or your person that wants to go compete at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World. Fitness, nutrition, and sleep, it's a population health issue.
100%.
We're talking about the things that affect every human being right now. They need to sleep better, eat better, and have fitness, right? So much of what we see in this industry is about getting people from this already of a high level of fitness to a higher level of fitness, right? Mm-hmm. From going from 12% body fat to 9% body fat. Well, let me tell people, break some news to you. The problem in this culture is not there aren't enough people with 9% body fat. It's that we have a obese issue in our country where fitness, nutrition, and sleep can help cure so much of that. So when somebody listens to this podcast or goes to our page, I don't necessarily want it to be just somebody who's saying, I want to go from a high level of fitness to a crazy level of fitness. I really wanted to address somebody who says, hey, I just went to the doctor. I'm 40 years old. I have high blood pressure. I have high cholesterol. I've never worked out a day in my life. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And I think people can listen to some of our information and say, oh, wow, eat, sleep, and add some level of fitness, and I can change my life. And then who knows how it affects them culturally. So our next podcast, we're going to talk about supplements. A lot of people don't know this. Me and you have been doing some research on actually doing it through Phenom Elite and through some information about doing kind of our own supplement line. And man, I think that's going to be a long journey because there is so much crap out there, right? Can we well digestible protein? Can we get a good intro workout? Can we get a good post workout? Can we get these things that, fact, and I know you well enough, we're not going to go create an HMB product, right? I mean, we're not going to do it. I'm not going to go create, right? But I do think there is value to a supplement line. So our next conversation is going to be on supplements. I'll post this video. I'll post some questions on supplements. I think this really might get crazy because so many people take so much crap, right? Mm-hmm. And I know we'll do the research. So post that hierarchy of mm-hmm. training. I think that's of recovery. Mm-hmm. We'll post this video. And then we'll just keep having some conversations on our page about some recovery. I'll go grab some things. Regeneration. We'll probably shut it down. We're good. We'll shut it down. I'll post this video for everybody. And what I'll do is I'll post our PDF too. So, this was an hour and 20 minutes. So somebody can actually go in and if they're only interested in the first topic, they can go to that spot. If they're only interested in the fourth topic, they know where to go in the podcast to watch that. So people, don't have to sit here and watch all 100, 80 minutes of us. But I think that's awesome. I think we answered a lot of questions. Anything else you want to end with, or are you good?
Nope, that's all I had. I'm good.
Okay. All right, man. We'll end it up. I'll post this for everybody, and then we'll look forward to that hierarchy of recovery. I'm interested in that, and we'll hit supplements on the next one. I appreciate everybody listening in. We'll talk to you soon, Mike.
Sounds good. See you.
All right, brother. Later on.